Hi, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025. An ancient disease makes yet another comeback. In Jeddah, Sudan, a former bus station is serving as a cholera clinic. Many of the patients are Sudanese, who have been displaced by the country's civil war. Action is needed, not tomorrow, but really now, said Yat Bohm of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's talking about a disease that has been around for centuries. Cholera, and is rearing its head again in Africa. Over the past 3 years, cases have more than doubled, with over 230 cases and nearly 5,000 deaths so far this year on the continent. Those cases are spread across 23 countries, up from 15 affected countries in 2022, according to Africa CDC. It's a disease that is easily treatable, yet deadly. It can kill someone in a matter of hours if good medical care is not provided promptly. The rising numbers brought African leaders to Lusaka, Zambia, where last week they announced an emergency plan and presidential task force to combat the severe diarrheal infection. The new plan is a joint effort between Africa CDC and the World Health Organization, who, in a situation report on cholera published last week, wrote that the situation continues to deteriorate, driven by conflict and poverty. It said cholera is resurging in a number of countries, including some that had not reported substantial case numbers in years, like Chad and the Republic of Congo. Particularly worrisome is that in half a dozen countries, over 1% of patients are dying of cholera, indicating serious gaps in case management and delayed access to care, according to the report. The infection comes from consuming water or food contaminated by the bacterium Vibrio cholerae. Boehm says an important part of the new initiative is that it is happening at the presidential level. That allows coordination across countries. As well as across multiple ministries within a country, such as those involved in water infrastructure. The actual driver, which is the access to clean water, is not the mandate of the Ministry of Health. So what is changing now is to bring the issue of cholera at the highest level, at the presidential level, Boehm says. With an estimated budget of $231 million, the emergency plan is focused on the next 6 months. This includes over 350 cholera treatment centers and hundreds of outpatient treatment locations. An estimated 10 million oral cholera vaccine doses will be needed, and the costs associated with vaccine will be covered by the donations. Boehm said one of the mandates of the task force is to mobilize resources for this effort. The plan's long-term goal is to eliminate cholera as a public health issue by 2030, a lofty aim for an ancient infection. Here is what you need to know about this old scourge that's still causing suffering today. Ancient history. Cholera's origins are in India. It's been in the Ganges Delta from the time immemorial, said Dr. David Sack, a professor of international health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, who's spent much of his career studying the disease. Cholera began spreading from India throughout the West in the early 1800s, with more global trade and travel by ships, he explains. Soon there were cases cropping up all the way from Russia and Western Europe to U.S. cities including Baltimore, New York, and Philadelphia. It was a disease that affected large parts of the world, Sachs says, with a fatality rate of about 50% if untreated. It killed millions of people as it spread across the globe. At that time, we didn't know what caused it, he says. We didn't know how to treat it. Theories about the cause of the illness were plentiful. The leading suspect was the foul air rising from sewers and piles of rotting trash. In cities, a poison from the soil was another possible culprit. Others looked higher up for a cause. Some faith leaders said it was a retribution by God for sinful behavior. Nearly all of the theories had a common thread, though. They appeared to be a link between cholera and overcrowded urban areas. Finally, in the 1850s, an English doctor named John Snow became a legend of public health for figuring out that an outbreak in the Soho neighborhood of London was linked to a single drinking water source. Snow is credited with stopping the raging outbreak, which claimed 100,000 lives across London. By removing the handle from the Broad Street water pump. Snow argued correctly the water contaminated with sewage was spreading the illness from one resident to another. But he still didn't know exactly what the water was contaminated with. At the time the pathogen was caused, cholera hadn't been yet discovered. He theorized that it might be tiny parasites or germs or some poison able to reproduce in the water. Around the same time, Italian scientist Filippo Pacini identified the bacteria that caused cholera, but his discovery wouldn't be widely accepted for decades, and in the meantime, millions more died. Fast killer. One thing that makes cholera notorious is its speed. The severe gastrointestinal disease can trigger so much diarrhea and vomiting that patients can rapidly become dehydrated. They can lose so much fluid that their internal organs shut down. This can happen over the course of days or just hours. According to the World Health Organization, there are 1.3 million to 4 million cases and between 21 to 143,000 deaths from cholera each year. Cases crop up throughout the world, particularly when a crisis or conflict strikes and clean drinking water is not available. And Africa has been particularly hard hit, currently accounting for 82% of global cases and nearly 94% of cholera-related deaths. According to Africa CDC, cholera often spreads when someone ingests water or food that has been contaminated by the bacteria, which can enter the water from the diarrhea of someone who is infected. Climate and conflict. There are two main types of cholera outbreaks: those that circulate within countries where outbreaks happen regularly, and those that begin spiraling out of control during a crisis, such as a conflict or natural disaster like a flood or an earthquake. In war zones like Ukraine, the breakdown of water, sanitation, and health infrastructure means that the introduction of cholera can spread rapidly and disastrously. As those infrastructures, some systems crumble in conflict, we can have sewage contamination of our water supply. And then our water supply can be a vehicle to transmit cholera, says Daniel Latagne, a research professor at the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University. During its ongoing civil war, for example, Yemen has the worst cholera outbreak in record history with more than 2.5 million cases and around 4,000 deaths, according to the United Nations International Organization for Migration. In Chad, the cholera outbreak is driven by the conflict in neighboring Sudan. You have the mass refuge influx, which leads to overcrowding in the camp with unsafe water and sanitation, says Bohm. Whether we are in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Chad, you always see how the humanitarian crisis is fueling those cholera outbreaks. There is no health without peace. Meanwhile, natural disasters, which can affect clean water supply, are becoming more common due to climate change. Floods, for example, pollute water, while drought dries up safe drinking water sources. That puts people fleeing areas destroyed by climate disasters at higher risk of exposure to cholera. Anytime you get people moving around and people having to use water that is not their normal water supply, there's likely to be a risk, says Sack, the professor of international health at Johns Hopkins. People on the move may end up drinking contaminated water from rivers or other water sources. And in place where cholera is newly emerging and re-emerging, people have little to no immunity from prior cases or vaccination. Souped up sugar water. The good news about cholera is that treatment is actually very simple. It's rehydration. Latagne says, cholera is a treatable disease, as long as the patient gets medical attention quickly. A patient with cholera should never die, Sack says. If they get to a treatment center in time, if they still have a breath, we can save their life. Treatment consists of simply keeping the person hydrated. Basically souped up sugar water, like Pedialyte. This strategy works in about 80% of cholera cases. In more severe cases, patients may need to be given fluids intravenously alongside antibiotics. If cholera is treated quickly within hours before a patient's health declines, fewer than 1% of patients die. Cholera is also fairly easy to identify. Patients have distinctive stool that is yellowish or whitish, kind of the color of water that rice is cooked in. And there are rapid tests that can check for suspected cases in individuals even before a laboratory confirms an outbreak. There are also 3 vaccines that can be administered in areas where cholera occurs regularly or when an epidemic begins to take root. Between 1997 and 2012, just 1.5 million doses of cholera vaccines were used worldwide. According to WHO, in 2017, WHO says that number jumped to over 10 million doses. And in 2023, some 35 million doses were used, says Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Since the vaccine supply is sometimes inadequate, mainly because it has not been a funding priority for other countries, we don't have enough vaccines for every place, SAC says, and it is difficult to venture into conflict zones, like the one in Ukraine, to vaccinate people. In 2013, however, Gavi established a cholera vaccine stockpile. Any country can request to use these reserves if it's experiencing a cholera outbreak. Cholera is certainly the stockpile that's used the most, says Alison Russell, the Senior Program Manager for Outbreaks and Global Health Security at Gavi. This year, as of July, she says, we've sent 30 million doses of cholera emergency vaccines to 12 countries. The vaccines are given orally, are easier to administer, and cost less than $5 a dose to produce and deliver. According to Africa's CDC, that means that with enough resources, everyone at risk could be vaccinated. The challenge of providing people with safe water and good sanitation is far more costly, but also key to preventing outbreaks. Without it, cholera persists even after an epidemic begins to slow. Epstein survivors join with lawmakers in calling for full release of government files. Anouska DeGeorgiou speaks during a press conference and rally in support of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, outside the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday. Women who say they were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein stood with a bipartisan group of House members on Wednesday, demanding additional transparency into the federal investigation of the convicted sex offender and his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. In an emotional press conference outside the U.S. Capitol, the Epstein survivors voiced support for an effort led by Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, and Thomas Massie, Republican from Kentucky, to force a House vote that would require the Justice Department to release its records in full, with redactions to protect information about victims and ongoing investigations. To be clear, the only motive for opposing this bill would be to conceal wrongdoings, said one of the survivors. Anouska DeGeorgiou, you have a choice. Stand with the truth or with the lies that have protected predators for decades. DeGeorgiou has said that she was abused by Epstein when she was just a teenager. She was one of 8 survivors who spoke Wednesday, sharing painful memories of abuse they suffered and emotional scars it left them with. Another woman, Marina Lacerda, said she was speaking publicly for the first time. She said she was 14 when she first met Epstein. They have documents with my name on them, and they were confiscated from Jeffrey Epstein's house and could help me put the pieces of my own life back together, she said. Survivor Anouska DeGeorgiou embraces survivor Daniel Bensky as survivor Marina Lacerda looks on during the news conference. Today, as you can see, we're united in restoring trust in government. We're here not as bipartisans, we're here as patriots, Khanna said, standing alongside the survivors. We begin the work of bringing this country together, progressives, independents, moderates, and yes, MAGA supporters, to demand the truth and justice. The survivors spoke as lawmakers in Congress are confronting how much information from the government's investigation into Epstein should be made public. The House Oversight Committee has already subpoenaed the Justice Department for records related to the investigation, and on Tuesday released the initial tranche of more than 30,000 documents. But the panel's work has drawn criticism from Democrats, as well as some Republicans, including Massey, who've expressed concern that any information shared by the committee wouldn't be extensive enough. They're allowing the DOJ to curate all of the information that the DOJ is giving them. If you've looked at the pages they've released so far, they're heavily redacted. Some pages are entirely redacted, and 97% of this is already in the public domain. Massey argued while urging the National Republicans to support his effort. To get their plan passed, Massey and Khanna have turned to rarely used legislative maneuver known as a discharge petition. The tool allows any member to force a vote, but they first have to gather 218 signatures from the House. 3 Republicans have already signed onto the petition: Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace. If every House Democrat joins in, Massey and Khanna would just need 2 more Republican signatures. In remarks, Greene, long known as a staunch Trump ally and conservative firebrand, expressed frustration over how the issue has divided factions of the GOP in recent months. It's grieved me to watch the arguments and debates take place among my colleagues. And even the administration, she said. I think this is something that is worth fighting for. The Epstein issue has caused a rare split between President Trump and many of his loyal supporters. On the campaign trail, Trump called for the release of more files, but the administrative has faced blowback in recent weeks, stemming from a DOJ memo issued in July, saying there was no evidence of Epstein had possessed an alleged client list. Democrats have sought a spotlight Trump's past friendship with Epstein, though Trump has repeatedly said their relationship ended before Epstein was indicted for soliciting prostitution in 2006. The relationship was highlighted during the press conference by Epstein's survivor, Shantae Davies. Who said that Epstein surrounded himself with the most powerful leaders of our country and world. The truth is, Epstein had a free pass. He bragged about his powerful friends, including our current president, Donald Trump. It was his biggest brag, actually, she said. Speaking to reporters from the Oval Office on Wednesday, Trump sought to sidestep a question about the survivors, describing the Epstein issue as a Democrat hoax that never ends. Throughout the press conference, Multiple survivors also called on the president to take action. Asked about his remark earlier that morning, Epstein survivor Haley Robeson urged the president to humanize the survivors and their stories. Mr. President Donald J. Trump, I am a registered Republican. Not that that matters because this is not political. However, I cordially invite you to the Capitol to meet me in person so you can understand this is not a hoax. She said, we are real human beings. This is real trauma. President Trump floats deploying National Guard troops to New Orleans. President Trump looks on after signing an executive order in the Oval Office of the White House on April 9, 2025, in Washington, D.C. President Trump said his administration is considering whether to deploy National Guard troops to Chicago or a city with a governor who, he says, would welcome them, like New Orleans. Illinois' Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker has strenuously objected to the potential deployment of troops to his state. Louisiana has a Republican governor, Jeff Landry, who posted on X following Trump's comments, saying he would take the president's help from New Orleans to Shreveport. Speaking from the Oval Office on Wednesday, Trump said in Louisiana, we have a great governor, Jeff Landry, who wants us to come in and straighten out a very nice section of this country that's become quite tough, quite bad. Well, straighten that out in about 2 weeks, he said. It'll take us 2 weeks easier than DC, but we could straighten out Chicago. All they have to do is ask us. Trump also floated sending National Guard to New York and Baltimore. He noted the Democratic governor's opposition in those various cities and argued the politicians are not in tune with the people. While crime and safety are perennial voter concerns, most voters surveyed opposed Trump's deployment of U.S. service members to the nation's capital city, where the rate of violent crime, mirroring a national trend, continues to decline. Still, he said, I think we're pretty much waiting till we get asked. Trump's remarks about when and where to send the National Guard has been shifting. While he has begun saying he will wait for governors to request federal support, Trump has also maintained that he has a right to send guards if he chooses. The president's comments come as his administration is fighting a lawsuit over his deployment of National Guard troops to Los Angeles. Earlier this week, a federal judge in California found that the administration violated federal laws that prohibit the use of military for domestic law enforcement. Trump portrayed Democrats for being in favor of crime, while he says his administration is trying to fight crime. He has previously predicted crime would be a major topic of next year's midterm elections. On Tuesday, Trump called DC's deployment a template for other places, though Trump's authority in the district is different from the state's.